Firstly, my thanks to His Majesty the King for once again kindly granting me access to the Royal Archives at Windsor Castle during the course of researching this subject. This story will probably shock. It has taken me over 2 years to find out precisely what occurred at Glücksburg Castle outside Flensburg in Germany on the 23rd of May 1945. And I have met official obstruction from the British authorities that continues to try and suppress information about what actually occurred. The Glücksburg heist is not well known, and is almost unreported in history books. Why? Because the crime that the British soldiers committed at Glücksburg had huge ramifications involving Buckingham Palace and the King himself, and led to an exhaustive inquiry by top Scotland Yard detectives to try and find both the perpetrators and the missing loot. After digging through the available archival sources, and despite having several Freedom of Information requests officially rejected on the grounds of official secrecy 79 years later, I have for the first time pieced together the extraordinary but until now unknown story of one of World War II's biggest jewel heists. A crime so damaging to the reputation of the British Army that it was officially buried for 8 decades, until now. In Episode 1, we will look at the fascinating background to the heist that occurred as part of a special operation 3 weeks after the German surrender to snuff out the remaining Nazi government that was still in operation in northern Germany, setting the stage for the Glücksburg heist. The unconditional surrender of the Third Reich occurred in the early hours of the 7th of May 1945 at Supreme Allied headquarters in the French city of Reims, when Colonel General Alfred Jodl, chief of the operations staff of the German High Command, signed on behalf of the new leader of Germany, Grand Admiral Karl Dönitz. Dönitz, until recently the head of the German Navy, had been nominated by Hitler to succeed him after his death, which had occurred on the mid-afternoon of the 30th of April 1945, when Red Army troops were only half a kilometre from Hitler's Berlin bunker. Hitler had posthumously split the office of the German leader into 2 posts. Dönitz was appointed Reich President, and Propaganda Minister Dr. Joseph Goebbels became Reich Chancellor. However, after failing to negotiate a ceasefire with the Soviets in Berlin, Goebbels had also ended his own life, dying on the 1st of May 1945, leaving Dönitz in complete control of what remained of Germany and its conquered territories. Dönitz determined to form a government at his headquarters in northern Germany and to keep fighting.
Kämpfen heißt opfern und siegen. Der Kampf geht weiter.
Why? Dönitz was under no illusions that the war was lost. However, he was overseeing Germany's last naval operation, codenamed Hannibal, a mass evacuation of soldiers and civilians from pockets on the East Prussian and Latvian coasts of the Baltic Sea to prevent these people being captured and abused by the Soviets. Over the next week, German generals, however, began to surrender, and the Allies continued to advance until Dönitz had no choice but to negotiate an end to the war. However, some time was bought when the Soviets objected to the surrender at Reims and demanded another ceremony in Berlin, the German capital having fallen to Stalin's forces on the 2nd of May. Therefore, on the 8th of May 1945, the German instrument of surrender was signed in Berlin by Field Marshal Wilhelm Keitel, chief of the Armed Forces General Staff, and Allied representatives. The war would officially end at 1 minute past midnight on the 9th of May 1945. But even though Germany had surrendered, a Nazi government still existed, that of Reich President Dönitz in the north of Germany, the provinces of Schleswig-Holstein. That government having been formed on the 2nd of May, as per Hitler's last will and testament. The German-held area of the Dönitz-Rump government, located on the Danish border, saw many leading and wanted Nazi figures flee into, in the hopes of either achieving new posts in the Dönitz cabinet or safety from arrest by the Allies. 3 men in particular interested the British, whose forces had captured nearby Hamburg and then Lüneburg, drawing up to the Dönitz-occupied area by the 15th of May 1945. These men were Reichsführer SS Heinrich Himmler, who had established a final headquarters close to Dönitz' seat of power and held regular meetings with the Grand Admiral, Dönitz handling this dangerous man carefully, as he still had with him many SS troops. The second man was the disgraced Reich Foreign Minister Joachim von Ribbentrop, and the third, Albert Speer, Hitler's architect-turned-armaments minister, who held the same position in the new government. British Prime Minister Winston Churchill urged that the Flensburg government not be shut down immediately. He was concerned lest the Soviets advance any further west and saw the continued existence of the Dönitz regime as a block on Stalin's ambitions. The government sat on territory that would form part of the post-war British occupation zone of Germany. Churchill also believed that Dönitz could assist in disbanding remaining German forces in the region, saving the British a lot of time and effort. The Soviets, of course, objected strongly, but could do little about it. General Eisenhower, the Supreme Allied Commander, reluctantly went along with Churchill's plan, but it was made clear that the Dönitz administration was now operating under the orders of the Allied commanders to carry out duties concerning the feeding, disarming and medical care of the German armed forces. It was not and would never be the official German government. That had ceased to exist. The Allies therefore established a liaison headquarters at Flensburg aboard the passenger liner Patria, headed by U.S. Major General Lowell Rooks and his British deputy Brigadier E.J. Ford. On the 13th of May 1945, the British had arrested Field Marshal Keitel as a war criminal, and in his place Dönitz had appointed Colonel General Jodl. The Dönitz government actually achieved nothing. There were lots of meetings and irrelevant things were debated, but once the Soviets made it clear that they wanted representation on the Allied liaison office at Flensburg, Churchill decided to end the Dönitz government. The decision was taken not to warn Dönitz that the game was up. Instead, the British decided to launch a raid to take everyone prisoner by surprise, hopefully also to nab some of the really important Nazi war criminals that were hiding out at Flensburg, Himmler remaining the #1 priority. On the 23rd of May 1945, the British launched Operation Blackout. The Dönitz government and military headquarters were centered on the German Naval College at Moerwijk, in a suburb of Flensburg. The task for getting rid of the Dönitz government was given to the British 11th Armoured Division. Firstly, tanks of the 15th, 19th Hussars would move up to cover the enclave's exits, followed by 2 infantry battalions from the 159th Brigade under Brigadier Churcher, entering the German-controlled area. Advancing from the west, the 1st Battalion, the Herefordshire Regiment, would occupy the Naval Torpedo and Signal School, the office of the Quartermaster General in Moerwijk, the school commander's villa adjoining the Naval School complex, and they already had a platoon of men stationed on the Patria, providing gangway guards to the Allied headquarters. Secondly, the 1st Battalion, the Cheshire Regiment, would occupy 2 barracks at the Naval School, the Mutzelberg Camp, and the Sports School, which was of course the seat of Dönitz's government, and Glücksburg Castle, which is 4 miles west of Flensburg. And it was here at Glücksburg that the British believed they would find Himmler and other top Nazis. Royal Marines would also assist in occupying the Naval School's main building, being used as the office of the High Command of the Navy, the Oberkommando de Marina, the OKM. Each British unit had attached to it a special field security section from MI-11. These were intelligence officers and translators who would actually identify wanted personalities and retrieve documents and so on. Finally, the 159th Infantry Brigade's 3rd Unit, the 4th Battalion, the King's Shropshire Light Infantry, would come forward once the buildings had been secured and take responsibility for the German prisoners, which would amount to some 6,000 men and women. The operation began by grabbing Dönitz and the commander of the navy, Admiral Hans von Friedeburg, and also the army chief, Colonel General Jodl. These men, with their aides, were summoned to a meeting aboard the Patria at 9:45 on the morning of the 23rd of May. On this occasion, the Dönitz party noticed that the usual British civility and military courtesy was absent. The guards from the Herefordshire Regiment did not present arms on this occasion. Kept waiting aboard the Patria for a few minutes. At the moment, the troops of the 159th Brigade activated Operation Blackout. General Rooks and his subordinates appeared, and Dönitz was informed that by order of the Supreme Commander, General Eisenhower, Dönitz and his companions would be taken into custody. Dönitz was told that his party could collect whatever baggage they required, and at 1:30 that afternoon they would be escorted to the airfield and flown out. Whilst this was going on, men from the Herefordshire Regiment, who had been guarding the Patria gangway, took the opportunity to remove Dönitz's pennants from his car. These pennants are now preserved today at the Herefordshire Regimental Museum. I recently had a chance to examine them in detail. At 10 o'clock precisely, Brigadier Cheshire, commanding 159th Brigade, activated Blackout. I'm going to concentrate primarily on the role of the Cheshire Regiment. Major G.H. Ruth Jones, commanding the Cheshire's A Company, raced up to the German control barrier at Heinz-Krug-Lager, crashing through, his men overpowering the German naval sentries outside the sports school, and within 1 minute they had secured the entire building. Following closely behind was Captain R.K. Rolfe and C Company, which rapidly entered Mutzelberg Lager and the OKM building. Major S.H. Cross and B Company set up perimeter pickets on all exits out of the naval school, sealing off the entire complex. The Reich war flag was lowered for the last time and retained as a souvenir. During the process of clearing rooms and searching male and female staff, soldiers of both the Cheshire Regiment and the Herefordshire Regiment looted, particularly watches, cameras, German medals and decorations, and many other items. In total, some 6,000 enemy personnel were driven outside to be sorted out and taken off to captivity. However, our focus is on what happened at Glücksburg Castle, 4 miles west from the naval school. Glücksburg Castle was of particular interest to the British, as I mentioned, as they were told to expect to find inside senior wanted Nazis, primarily Heinrich Himmler, Foreign Minister Joachim von Ribbentrop, or even the traitor William Joyce, known to wartime wireless listeners as Lord Haw-Haw. In the end, however, the British soldiers ended up committing armed robbery, as we will see. Before we leave the action at Flensburg and turn our attention fully to the castle, there was one final event at Moerwijk that has become symbolic of the end of the Dönitz government. British troops had been dealing with Dönitz and his companions. As I mentioned, Dönitz and the other senior officers were due to leave by air under British escort as prisoners of war, and Dönitz was permitted 1 suitcase, along with his aide-de-camp and batman. Dönitz's party was taken to Flensburg police station, and each prisoner in turn was taken behind a screened-off area in the main room to be searched. Accompanying Dönitz was Captain Hugh Williams of the King's Shropshire Light Infantry, who was officer in charge of photography, and Captain Derek Nee, the Dorsetshire Regiment, from Field Marshal Montgomery's staff and a fluent German speaker. Some minutes into the search of Dönitz's baggage, a field security officer appeared from behind the screen holding this, Dönitz's Grand Admiral's baton presented to him by Hitler in 1943 and the symbol of his rank. The security officer and Captain Williams carefully examined it. They decided that it should be given to the brigade commander, and it was taken to Brigadier Church's office and locked in the safe. Churcher was a King's Shropshire Light Infantry officer, and eventually Dönitz's baton reached the KSLI Regimental Museum, where it has remained ever since, and where, during the course of my research, I was very kindly permitted to examine and handle this unique relic of a unique operation. Needless to say, Dönitz's baton is worth several £1,000,000, and I was very careful not to drop it. Also on this rather special day, we were able to reunite Dönitz's baton, held at the Soldiers of Shropshire Museum, with the pennants taken from his car by the Herefordshire Regiment sentries, and it was only the second time since World War II that these items have been in the same room together. Another interesting item from Flensburg at the Soldiers of Shropshire Museum is this naval barometer taken from Dönitz's office wall. I would urge you all, if you have the opportunity, to visit these museums. Also visit the links in the end screen and help support both of these excellent institutions in their work in preserving history. The items on display are used to educate the public about important historical events and are not hidden away in private collections. Both museums urgently need support, so please do what you can to help. One man who would not be leaving with Dönitz was General Admiral von Friedeburg. Thoroughly demoralized by having been part of 3 surrender ceremonies, at Field Marshal Montgomery's headquarters on the 4th of May, at Reims on the 7th of May, and Berlin on the 8th, the dissolution of the Dönitz regime on the 23rd of May appears to have been too much. Excusing himself into this lavatory whilst gathering his baggage under British supervision, the General Admiral swallowed poison, and the British were unable to save his life. Later, when his corpse was laid out in his bedroom for inspection to be filmed and photographed, a British soldier stole von Friedeburg's Knight's Cross of the War Merit Cross with swords, a very rare award indeed that he wore around his neck. The Germans complained about this, quote, dishonourable treatment, end quote, to the British, who did interview everyone that had been in von Friedeburg's rooms, but the decoration was never found. We turn back now to Glücksburg Castle, where the final part of the operation to remove the Dönitz government was about to be enacted, led by a dashing, young and highly decorated British officer, who some say was the model for Ian Fleming's James Bond. Tune in for part 2, when the British unit goes rogue and pulls off one of the biggest heists of the 20th century, incurring the displeasure of none other than the King himself. Thanks for watching. Please subscribe and share, and also visit my audiobook channel, War Stories with Mark Felton. You can also help to support both of my channels at PayPal and Patreon. Details in the description box below.